Hey, geeks and geekettes, this is Chuck Dixon back to talk to you about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Yes, it's another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, Chapter 41. If you want to know how to ask Chuck Dixon a question, that would be me, um, you can contact me at Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com. Ask your questions there directly. It's the most direct path to me, and I look at it every day. So I'm not going to miss your question. Other than that, you can ask questions in the video below, although I might not see it if you're watching an older video right now. Um, but I'll eventually catch up to it. Or you can find me on Facebook and ask questions there. But the most direct route is that email address right there, brunobookstore at gmail.com. Let's get to our first question. Ben Baker, good old Ben Baker. When writing a 6-issue story, do you start by coming up with a few big ideas about what you want to see, then fill in the gaps for how to get the characters there? Or do you choose a few characters and a starting point, write how they would react, and almost allow the characters to dictate what happens and when? Um, Larry Hama writes that way. He basically sets his characters in motion and then allows them, because of the history he's built for them and what he knows about them, allows them to determine the story path. That's the reason why so much of Larry's stuff is fresh and original, because he's basically writing it as he thinks of it. You know, it's real seat of the pants type writing, and Larry's a nervy guy, so it's a perfect style for him. It's a nervy style of writing. Myself, I don't do a lot of outlining and plotting, but I do generally know where I'm going with the story before I start. I really can't begin a story until I know how it's going to end. Um, and there's lots of ways to get there. I mean, a 6-issue arc, you're talking about a trade paperback, basically. And I approach trade paperbacks as if they were a feature film or a movie, the old beginning, middle, and end. But I want the story to feel complete. Too many trade paperbacks that are collected from ongoing series seem like another chapter rather than another story, if you know what I mean. And they leave too many things dangling. Now, if you're reading a trade paperback story of Batman or Superman or Spider-Man, I mean, you realize that there's stories that occurred before this volume and stories that will occur afterwards. But as a reader, you want a complete story in and of itself. Now, there may be dangling subplots, unresolved issues that will be dealt with in future stories, but you want a resolution of whatever it was going on in the story that you're reading. You don't want a cliffhanger at the end of 6 issues that leaves the major issues of that story unresolved. That's just not fair to the reader, I don't think. But, you got to have your cast of characters. You got to have a way to bring them together. The easiest way to do that is a collision course story. I had a writer one time tell me that his favorite kind of story to write, he felt his best writing were collision course stories, where he introduced disparate characters and then had the plot line bring them together to one place. I confess that that's the kind of plotting I use when I can't think of anything else. It's kind of my default plotting mode, and I don't go to it very often because it's too easy. It's too easy to do that. But um, your suggestion that perhaps I come up with big scenes and then figure out how to get to them is accurate. That's how I generally write. If I'm offered a character, a franchise, the opportunity to do a story, I generally think of, well, what's the big scene? What's the payoff? What's the eye candy, the big money scene, the one that people are hopefully going to remember? And then I've got to get to that scene. I've got to build the characters and the situations and complications to get there. Get onto that, that burning bridge, that sinking ship, that crashing plane, that fight between two monsters, whatever it is that ends the series, the big confrontation. So yeah, I generally think of the big scene. My understanding is that's how Raymond Chandler wrote. He would come up with individual scenes that he wanted to do, And in fact, Alfred Hitchcock worked that way quite a bit when he was working with writers on original screenplays. He would come up with a list of gags. This is how North by Northwest, classic suspense film, was written. Um, Hitchcock and Ernest Lehman, the screenwriter, met for days, and Hitchcock just fired off crazy ideas, and then Lehman figured out a way to interconnect them. You know, the assassination in the at the UN, the chase and suspense scene on top of Mount Rushmore, those kind of things. And Hitchcock came up with all of them. And Lehman said the only one he wasn't able to use that Hitchcock suggested was a scene where an Eskimo is ice fishing and pulls a human hand out of the water. He's hooked a human hand, a severed human hand. Lehman said he couldn't figure out how to get that into the story. But yeah, that's my working method. Of course, I'm not suggesting that method because every writer um, approaches work with their own unique mindset, as I will address in detail later in this very video. Okay, I get a lot of questions about Bane. So a little Bane 101 for all of you. And basically, how Bane affects my world. Bane, of course, is the villain who broke Batman's back in Nightfall. And he's been in movies and he's been in the cartoons, and he's become a household name. Everybody knows who Bane is. He's been, I think, hundreds of action figures. I'm looking at least 50 right now. And there's been statues and all kinds of crazy tchotchkes. I love this bobblehead Bane. Well, it's more like a bobbleback Bane. Uh, And there's some Bane stuff that even I don't understand. I don't know what this is. It's Bane, but I don't get it. There's Bane Pez. That's a lot of fun. Bane's even been a cute little plush that the kids can take to help them fall asleep during their nap. And speaking of plushes, Osito, Bane's own teddy bear, has had a plush of him dressed as Bane. So good to see Osito getting some attention. uh, Bane's oldest friend, imaginary friend, I suppose. Fisher Price has been good with Bane. They make new Bane toys all the time. But the number one toy company for Bane is Lego. For some reason, Lego loves Bane. They really do. They've made so many different versions, and they've included him everywhere they could in their movies, and in the games especially. Bane always shows up in games, even if they're DC Comics games set in outer space. Somehow Bane shows up. And speaking of Bane, he's extraordinarily popular in the online multiplayer games. I don't play these games, but people that I do know who play them say that Bane is always a challenge. One guy told me that he and his son, it took them 2 weeks to get past Bane to get to the next level. And a number of game players have said that um, Bane is sometimes a unique experience in that he's actually frightening uh, inside the play of the game. So we got a couple of questions about Bane's, more specific. Erebus says, I love Nightfall. It's my favorite Batman story. But in Volume 1, Bane is defeated. And in Volume 2 and 3, we see less of Bane and a bigger focus on Azrael and cleaning up Bane's mess. Did you have plans for Bane during those 2 volumes? I would have loved to have seen more of him. Well, Graham and I, this is Graham's original model sheet for Bane. Graham and I, always had plans for Bane. We didn't know that he'd become as popular as he became, but we always had like a longer epic story about who Bane's father was, Bane's plan for the rest of his life. Um, Very much along the lines of Doctor Doom, a villain that both Graham and I really admire. Well, the creation of it. It Bane is a larger than life figure who has plans of conquest, and we wanted to get into all of that. Now, the reason why he doesn't appear after he's defeated, because when you defeat a villain in a story, especially in comics, it's right to have a moratorium on that villain. He just sort of goes away. And if anybody who remembers the series, we see him shortly after his defeat in Nightfall, and he's been taken off of Venom. And he's basically just a big tub of goo in a jail cell. I mean, the poor guy, Venom, pretty much ruined his life, even though it gave him, this extraordinary physical power. Um, but yeah, the plan was that he would come back later on, which he did in Legacy, which was a a crossover, Batman crossover, pretty much guided by Graham and I. It was very Bane centric, with Bane meeting up with Ra's al Ghul, teaming up, and with a further step in Bane's ascendancy in the world of crime to be a more of a global figure. And of course, Graham and I revisited that in Bane Conquest, in which Bane uh, takes on most of the global criminal conspiracies in the DCU in order to rise to become sort of an emperor of crime by the end of that maxi series. All right, Erebus asks another question. Are there any other of Bane's weaknesses you intended but never got to show besides his main ones, such as a over-reliance on Venom? Bane mopped the floor with a bunch of villains, but is there any villain you think could beat Bane one-on-one? Well, I already discussed the Venom thing. I think the only other weakness Bane has is his ego, but you kind of have to be an alpha male um, to be the kind of guy he is. I think, Batman has a problem with ego. I think any alpha male has a problem with ego. It's what drives them. Is it a problem or is it an asset? Well, you decide. But, the more testosterone you enter into your system, and Bane was mainlining the stuff, the bigger an ego you're going to have. The more alpha is going to be in your alpha male. As far as villains that could give Bane a hard time, Killer Croc comes to mind. I think Bane could ultimately defeat Killer Croc because Killer Croc is a brawler and a brute, and Bane always finds an advantage. But as far as physicality and strength, ruthlessness and viciousness, it would be a fight for the ages. The two of them did meet briefly during Nightfall, but that was not a decisive battle, in my opinion. The only other character in the Batman universe that could give Bane a hard time would have been KG Beast in his prime. Quite frankly, Bane was created to replace KG Beast. Um, at the time of Nightfall, we needed a character equal to Batman's physical and intellectual abilities in order to bring Batman down. Batman wasn't going to be brought down by some piker. Um, so, KG Beast would have filled the bill, unfortunately. Well, fortunately for the world, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and the KG Beast was irrelevant. And so that's one of the main things that led to the creation of Bane, other than the fact that we wanted to come out of Nightfall with a new Batman villain. And in sort of a nod to all of that, KG Beast, as he exists today, appears in appears in Bane Conquest. Um, in fact, allies himself with Bane in Bane's battle with the criminal organization known as Cobra. So you might want to check that out. This is like a big, long commercial for Bane Conquest. It's in trade paperback now, and it's worth taking a look at. One more from Erebus. He loves that Bane. Do you like Tom King's portrayal of Bane in Batman I Am Bane? It got pretty weird with the whole mommy obsession. I remember Bane having to quickly get over his mother and his backstory. No time to grieve kind of deal. Yeah, we didn't really deal. The only parentage issue that Bane had was not knowing who his father was. We didn't deal much with his mother because, frankly, his mother died at such an early age. He wouldn't have had a lot of memories of her. Growing up, he was pretty much adopted and parented by zombie Trog and Bird, who would become his henchmen later on. They were kind of like uncles to him. Yes, I never really saw him, well, I don't tend to write characters as Freudian anyway. I'll get into a little more of that soon. Um, so yeah, yeah, the mommy issues thing doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I did read part of it. It wasn't, I mean, people say, what do you think of this in Batman continuity? What do you think of the new Robin? Things like that. And it's like, I have to say, I don't know because I don't read the continuity of a book after I've left. I don't continue to read books that I used to write. It's like watching your kids go off with a stepdad, I'm not real sensitive or anything like that, but it's like I'm not being paid to think about these characters anymore. So, there's no impetus to continue reading them once I am no longer gainfully employed thinking about them. So, but I still love Batman. A lot of great memories of working on it. But I'm not about to dump on what someone else did. But the I Am Bane storyline, not really my thing. Not my kind of comics. Jack Nero 99 says greetings from Germany. V Gates. What are your thoughts on the Arrow TV show that basically turned Oliver Queen into a Batman Punisher chimera? Did they pay you anything for the 10 seconds Brutal Guillermo Barrera appeared on the show? Um, yeah, I watched a few seasons of Arrow, mostly because my youngest son was into it. And I think I watched maybe 2.5 seasons, from the beginning. And it was kind of fun, but I find the CW shows, because I watched some Flash too, and I might have watched some Supergirl. Yeah, I watched a couple of Supergirls. The CW shows, they fall into a formula, and more on formula later. They fall into a format, a formula, and the episodes get kind of repetitive. And I think one of the things that hurt Arrow was the flashbacks. I think they thought, well, it's like Lost, and we'll flash back to like this Lost thing because Lost is popular. And I don't think they thought the show was going to run as long as it did, and they were trapped with these flashbacks that never seemed to catch up to the present. But I thought it was well mounted, well acted. The cast really seemed really into it. It's costume superheroes. It's fun. I mean, if you like that kind of thing, I can see why people would really like it. But it wasn't, again, wasn't for me. I'm not the audience for this stuff. The thing that bothers me about CW shows is that they every episode of every show has an extended scene where two characters talk about a character who isn't present. It's like, what about Barry? I'm so worried about him. And then they talk about him. Now, this is to save money in the budget because those kinds of scenes are cheap to shoot. And these shows, obviously have very healthy budgets with all the special effects and action. I understand why they write those scenes. I just wish they'd make them more meaningful or maybe even funny. So, some kind of subplot that's not just two people being Dr. Explaino to each other. And Brutal, he was a villain who appeared a number of times in Green Arrow and Nightwing. Yeah, he's on screen like almost no time. I don't even know why they mentioned his name, but I did. Yeah, I got a check off of it. And boy, I think Scott McDaniel was the original creator of Brutal, so he got a check as well. So that was nice. Little one-time payout. Paulo A. Prado. He asks, hey, Mr. Dixon, question from a Brazilian fan. Well, hello down in Brazil. How was the experience of writing Simpsons comics? Were there any rules, guidelines? Did you watch the show? Please tell more details. Thanks. Yeah, I was on Simpsons for quite a while. Originally, what happened was they used to publish, every year they published Treehouse of Horror. It was a Halloween special, and they would invite different comic writers who had never written The Simpsons before to write for it. And one year I got the nod, and I wrote a story for that year's Treehouse of Horror collection. And I enjoyed it so much that I said, hey, could I submit other ideas? Could I pitch you some other stuff? And they said yes, they would welcome that. So, I pitched a few things, they bought them. And, toward the end of the 90s, I sold a story here, a story there. Then I went to CrossGen. When I stopped working at CrossGen, I needed work. And I turned to Bongo and started pitching more stuff. And I worked for them more regularly for quite a few years, doing as many as 8 or 9 issues a year of various things. And then eventually they would ask me to do things. They would say, well, we've got this winter special, or we need a Christmas story, or we need a 10-pager here. And a little more on that later. But if you see my Simpsons comics, sometimes you'll see the scripts credited to me and E. Blackburn. Well, E. Blackburn is my wife, and she's a very creative person on her own, but no real interest in comics. But she would come up with Simpsons plot lines, because they're family based and everything else. She's not really a fan of the show, but she understood the show. She understands the characters. And she would say, well, did they ever do this? Did they ever do that? And from there, And those discussions would grow a whole Simpsons plot line. But, the high concept ideas were all hers. And my favorite issue of all of them that she wrote was, or that she plotted, was the cat lady issue. There was an issue where we dealt with the origin of the cat lady and the rehabilitation of the cat lady, and all the rest of it. As Lisa becomes involved with finding home for all of the cats that are now abandoned when the cat lady basically gets over her neuroses. And I think it's one of the funnier issues I wrote. And it's and just the premise of it was just beautiful. And thank my wife for that. She plotted maybe 10 or 12 of the Simpsons issues that I wrote, including a brilliant one uh, about Sideshow Bob. That's the Sideshow Bob one is probably one of the better ones I wrote too. But that plot line was her. Um, and like I said, sometimes they would ask me to write stories, and this one in the middle with with Grandpa as Rosie the Riveter. They asked me to write that one. Dan Spiegel, I think they approached Dan Spiegel about doing a Simpsons comic, and they wanted it specifically to be about Grandpa Simpson's experiences in World War II. And I'd worked with Dan before, and I loved working with Dan. Terrific comic book artist. And so I created basically a parody of DC War comics, which Dan drew quite a few of. And it's about Abe in Europe fighting the Nazis. It was a funny issue, and it was a lot of fun to work on. And yeah, I wasn't, I watched the show. I was very familiar with it, and I read quite a bit about how the show was created and everything else, which was very helpful, because there's a big difference between watching and enjoying something and writing about it, because you got to think a lot harder about it. And in an early interview with one of the Simpsons writers, he said that one of the reasons he thought the Simpsons lasted as long as it did was that early on in the creation process for the series, James L. Brooks, who was the series producer and the producer of the Tracy Ullman show where the Simpsons shorts originally appeared, he told them he told the writers and the creative staff, when you're doing the Simpsons, it's a parody, it's funny, it's goofy, but don't forget to give it heart, and don't forget to build characters that the audience can care about. And I think that really is the lasting aspect. This is why the Simpsons are still around, because they took care to create characters that the audience would care about. You kind of feel for them. And I think that's the reason for its longevity. And that's something I took to heart when I was writing the stories. Just don't write silly, pastiches full of one-liners and jokey joke. Actually write a story, almost a dramatic story that, will be portrayed as a comedy. So often tragic. I mean, the Simpsons go through a lot of crap. They always come out all right in the end, but they go through a lot of bad stuff sometimes, particularly Lisa. Poor Lisa. And the other great thing about Simpsons was I got to work with a lot of terrific artists, often guys that I knew from before. Hillary Barta and I got to do this Doctor Strange send up, our parody of Steve Ditko, when we got to do a Plasmo story. Plasmo was the sort of Doctor Strange character in the Bongo superhero universe. And of course, here he encounters the kids from Riverdale. That stuff was a lot of fun to work on. I really enjoyed it. John Kilgallen, that's a great name. Mr. Dixon, forgive me if this has been asked and answered. Levon Cade, any future stories in the mill? I devoured this series earlier this year. Great. Any particular inspirations for the character and his situations? Any inspirations for Cade from previous characters or stories you wrote for the comics? Well, I'm working on an 8th novel. I'm almost done. I got maybe another 10,000 words to go, and it's a big one. It's the longest Cade story I've ever written, and hopefully it will be out shortly after you see this video. Hopefully by the time you finish this video, I've actually have finished the novel, because I plan to finish it over Christmas. Inspirations for the character they basically come from 50s and 60s hard-boiled crime novels and 1970s men's adventure books like Executioner and Destroyer and The Butcher and those kind of characters. But, Levon's a little more grounded than those characters. And of course, my work on The Punisher is in this same sort of wheelhouse of vigilante justice, the lone man bringing the law where there is no law. But again, the Punisher grows out of that same kind of material. The Punisher is very much a child of 50s and 60s hard-boiled crime fiction and those 70s men's adventure characters. So it's kind of all in the same genre. But yes, I am working on it. And over the COVID plague, the Kung Flu, with Hollywood lockdown, Sylvester Stallone had a lot of time to write, and he wrote the first few episodes of the Levon Cade television series, which is slated to be produced by his Balboa Productions and slated to go into production soon. So all good news on Levon. And yes, I do have an idea for the 9th novel. It's going to be a flashback novel of Levon during his military service. So there you go, Levon fans. Shilling Spree says, "Hi Chuck, are you familiar with Joseph Campbell's book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces? Do you incorporate what he outlines as the hero's journey into your stories? And if so, what aspects do you include? Would you mind giving some examples?" Well, I can't give you any examples because I don't follow Joseph Campbell. But I do have a lot to say on the subject, and this may get raucous. Joseph Campbell is an academic, and he writes about myth and the power of myth. That's one of his books, The Power of Myth. And he, was kind of prolific on the subject: The Hero with a Thousand Faces, The Hero's Journey, Power of Myth, a bunch of other stuff. And he basically, even though he's not a fiction writer, he's not a storyteller himself, he pontificates on the power of story and, its ability to move us. But he comes to a lot of conclusions that I don't really appreciate. Um, he appeared on a series of TV specials on public television with NPR, PBS parasite Bill Moyers hosting them, and he kind of became famous. And on these shows, he would lay out basically the template for storytelling, the template that he believed was kind of hardwired into our brain, and its sources could be found in all the world's mythology, as if the human intellect shared this kind of desire to hear a particular kind of story, and that all storytelling grows from that, and all storytelling doesn't really fall too far from the tree, if you know what I mean, that there isn't that great a variance in the kind of stories you can tell that people will respond to. And it kind of lays out a pattern, a kind of, this and then that, and then this and then that for a story. And, it comes out of myth. It comes out of the hero with the tragic past and a mystery to solve, and challenges to face, and, a world of conflict and danger. And it lays down the tracks, the format, a formula, a template for storytelling that some writers embrace, and they, but most of those writers are hacks, the ones who embrace this, because, it tells you that as long as you, follow the right moves, you'll have a successful story. And it doesn't take into account all the many variables of the human psyche, as if we are not all unique. And we are all unique. And the way we approach story and the way we think, every writer is different. They come from a different place. Unless, of course, you're hacking. And when you're hacking, you're just following formula. You're just lining up the tropes. You're getting your beginning, your middle, and end. You're getting your love interest and your character arc and your conflict. And you're just sort of mechanically putting it all together. Oh, he could be very successful as a hack, but I don't think you can be very happy as a hack. And I've had several hacks, and I've met a lot of them in comics, and I've met even more of them in Hollywood. And they'll tell you things like, there's only two kinds of stories. There's only two plot lines in the world, Cinderella and Goldilocks. Okay, some say there's as many as 7 plot lines, but this is the one that I hear most often. And it's supposed to be like, ooh, mind blown. But then when you think about it, it's ridiculous because so many stories do not fit into Cinderella or Goldilocks, whatever that means. Um, I mean, where does Casablanca fit? Who's Cinderella? Who's Goldilocks? 2001, Easy Rider, The Seven Samurai. Where do these things fit in Cinderella and Goldilocks? They don't. They don't fit at all, and you can't make them fit. But a certain kind of writer who's into writing for all the wrong reasons um, loves having this kind of thing. Loves being told this is how it's done. These are the ingredients, like as if creating a story were a recipe. And it's not, because, like I said, we're all different. There's too many variables in the human mind. And then when you add to that the variables in the human imagination, which, in your imagination is fed by your own experience, it's fed by things you've been exposed to, it's fed by other stories, it's fed by people you've met, it's paintings you've seen, I mean, whatever, music you've heard. And all of that goes into the hopper and comes out with your own unique vision. And I mean, I read recently some scientist, I guess he was like the Joseph Campbell of zoology, put forward the idea that dogs, canines, have it in their DNA to be loyal to humans, to associate and socialize with humans. I mean, what a brutally cold scientific way to look at that. I reject that entirely. And I think that dogs, along with cats and horses and carrier pigeons, have developed a relationship with human beings, not based on any of their DNA, but through breeding or whatever, convenience. But to think that a dog somehow has a coldly symbiotic relationship with humans is sad. On the same ticket, the idea that we all think the same story and it just sort of comes out different, with a few variations, that's sad as well. But the saddest part of everything about Joseph Campbell isn't that writers glommed onto him, it's that producers glommed onto it. That producers thought, hey, there's, a way to write story and a way to not write story. And they even came up with computer programs for helping you write screenplays. I had a collaborator a few years ago. Actually, we were working on something, and he said that he used this program to look at what we had written and decided that we needed, this kind of scene at the end of Act Two. And it's just like, what the hell? Are you crazy? A computer told you this, and you think that's good? It's not good. Because what it does is it removes surprise from the story. But of course, producers don't care about surprise, they care about box office. Hollywood people are all about conservation of risk. What can we do, to make sure this movie makes money, to remove risk from the equation? Well, we got to have a female character, we got to have a love interest, and we got to have this, and we got to have that. And that's how you end up with movies like Ninja 3, The Domination, which has as much flash dancing in it as it does samurai action, because flash dance was popular at the time. This is the kind of thinking, and I'm using thinking with air quotes, that producers do. And unfortunately, Joseph Campbell has kind of given them the keys to this whole tedious, realm of thought that takes individuality in writing out of the equation and replaces it with a checklist. And that's not good. That's not good. And if you're a writer or want to be a writer, you don't want to write this way. You just want to freewheel it. You just want to come up with the craziest ideas you can. And you don't let anybody say, well, that's, you need this kind of scene, you need that kind of scene, and this story's not structured correctly, or blah, 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 blah. To hell with that. This is how we end up with the kind of crap we end up on, particularly in streaming and Netflix and Amazon and places like that, where the story So many stories are exactly the same story. They're recast, they're in different locales and everything else, but they're exactly the same story because of this mindset, this formula that Joseph Campbell is a part of. And there's always been a Hollywood model to films, but it's not a formula; it's a model. And what it is that you introduce your characters as quickly as possible, you set them in motion, and whether it's a comedy, a horror story, a thriller, whatever it is, you set them in motion toward an ending that is either surprising or cathartic or in some other way satisfying. And you have deconstructed plot lines where you present complications for them to overcome. Nothing's ever easy for the character. Okay, they have struggles and challenges and all the rest of it. And of course, there's a lot of stories that violate those rules as well that are perfectly wonderful. So, but these are all the things you have to put in a story, but you can't put them in A, B, C, D. I mean, Netflix in particular. Netflix specializes in the kind of show where they introduce a burnout character or two burnout characters. And those people are so burnt out that they go back to wherever they came from. They go back to their hometown. And invariably, when they get to their hometown, either someone they know or they themselves are falsely accused of a crime. I mean, often the lead characters are, lawyers, small town criminals, or cops. And so they go and they find out, maybe there's a seedy underbelly to the town that they used to live in, and that they really don't know what's going on in the town. There was a dark underbelly to their growing up. And a lot of times this is tied to some sort of traumatic event that happened in that town that's either half remembered or vaguely understood, and that must be revealed. And of course, when all is revealed, they find out that the place where they grew up and loved so much and were looking forward to returning to is actually a hellhole, a pit of evil with a smiling veneer covering it. You've seen the story over and over again. And as I'm telling you this, in the back of your mind, it's tingling. Ooh, I watched that. And now you're saying to yourself, why did I bother watching that? I wasn't entertained. I wasn't surprised. I didn't really enjoy it that much. But that's goes back to Joseph Campbell, to my mind. This all starts with Joseph Campbell, this formulaic writing. And from Campbell grew a computer program for writing screenplays. I mean, back in the day, the hero's journey was he arrived, he kicked ass, he got the girl, and that was the end of the movie. He didn't learn anything. I can't tell you how many editors or producers will say to me, well, what does the character learn in this story? I don't know. What's the theme of this story? I don't know. I don't write to theme. Theme is something that's drawn out of it by the consumer. Okay? People see things in my work I didn't intend to put there or didn't realize I was putting there. And back when I was growing up, the hero was introduced. First of all, he's introduced as a badass, or he becomes a badass over the course of the story. I guess that's an arc. He becomes a badass and he beats the bad guy up and he gets the girl at the end of the story. And that's a Hollywood model story. It's perfectly serviceable. These days, and tell me you haven't seen this a million times. The hero is presented with a challenge. He's presented as a hero, and then he's presented with a challenge and he walks away from the challenge. I can't deal with that, or that's none of my business. And then you're like, geez, Chuck Norris wouldn't do that. and then something happens. His girlfriend is murdered, or his car is stolen, or his kids are threatened at school, and then he acts. Now it's personal. And then he goes through all the motions he would have gone through anyway, and all the stuff you see in the trailer happens then. So again, back of your mind is tingling. Yeah, I've seen that a million times. And every time you see that scene, a little part of you dies. When the hero, when in the Star Trek movies, when Captain Kirk is going to lose his captaincy ship, he's going to lose the captain's chair and have to struggle back toward it. A little part of you goes, oh, I don't want to see this. I just want to see Captain Kirk flying around the Enterprise kicking Klingon ass. I don't want to see him constantly flummoxed with these pointless complications that don't improve the story. They delay the story. They delay the story I want to get to. In a Rambo movie, you don't see Rambo walking away. He just like, what do you want me to do? Who has to be saved? Where do I go? Boom, he's there. And he's doing it. And whatever complications and everything else he faces are a part are made or happen to him after he's made that decision, not before he's made that decision. Eek. That's not storytelling. All right. Let's talk about something happier. The wondrous history of classical film. He asks, or she asks, or they ask, are we ever going to get another Western comic from you? Well, there's no secret. I love Westerns, any kind of Western. I love the Western because it's free range of imagination. And I'm talking about the fictional West, not the real West. Anything can happen. It's heroes and villains and nature and all the rest of it. And I dig all of it. I love every kind of Western. You know, if you ask me what I want to watch, Western is my first choice every single time. And I've watched and rewatched all the Westerns that I have on Blu-ray and DVD, and I'm always looking for new ones. But I think I've seen them all by this time. And I'm talking about even the singing cowboy Westerns. So, I dig the whole genre. An Italian producer once said that he loved Westerns because he could fall asleep in the middle of one, and when he woke up, he still knew what was going on. I think that's a great summation of the Western and its appeal. Now, Graham Nolan, who is successfully running his one-man operation over there at Compass Comics, doing some fantastic stuff, absolutely fantastic comic work over at Compass Comics. He would like me to write a Western, and I'd love to write one for him, but he's got to pick what kind of Western he wants. And every time he brings it up, I say, okay, I'll write you a Western in a heartbeat, but you got to tell me what kind of Western, you know, one set on the border, like an Italian Western kind of thing, cattle drive, town Western, outlaws, cavalry Western. Just tell me, Graham. So if you're, if you go over and check out Graham's videos, he's got a fantastic YouTube channel of his own. Pester him. Say, tell Chuck what kind of Western you want to do, and I will write it. I'll start that day and write him a Western. But I need a little help. So maybe you can saddle up, head over to his ranch, and give him a hoorah on over what kind of Western he would like me to write for him, because I'd sure dig writing one. And if he doesn't come up with one eventually, I'm going to run this picture in every single video I do from now on. Hey, did you like this video? Then why not let the world know about it? Hit that like button, which helps YouTube let other people know about these videos. There's a whole world of geekdom and nerdiness and comic book, knowledge out there, or ill knowledge, that I'm trying to reach out to. And the more people that watch this, the more worthwhile, frankly, it is for me to do. So like this video, give me an attaboy, and we're good. That's all I ask. Hey, hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed this. I certainly did. I will see you all down the road.